Perihelion Ring floated over New Ajmer like a polished halo, its spokes catching the pale gold light of the system's star. Traffic drifted along its exterior lanes in patient threads of luminescence: freighters, shuttles, service skiffs, and today, one small vehicle whose schedule had already been flagged with 3 different notations inside the Terran Frontier Council's systems. The shuttle itself never saw those annotations. Its passengers had other things on their minds. Inside Dock Sector C, Bay 12, a group of students in gray-blue excursion jackets bounced on the balls of their feet, clustered around a transparent bulkhead that looked out over their ride. To them, the vehicle was not Terran Education Transit 3 Delta. It was the Comet Coach, emblazoned with a stylized tail of painted stars and a grinning cartoon satellite. Miss Nyla Ortega watched them with a familiar mixture of affection and calculation. She was in her late 30s, tall, with tired but sharp eyes, and she had already noticed who was keeping to the edges of the group and who was hovering at its center. Imani Curry stood with her palms flat on the glass, dark curls spilling forward as she tracked a maintenance drone's lazy spin. She was already mapping the docking bay in her head, assigning labels, spotting exits and choke points without consciously deciding to. Her brain did this the way other children hummed songs. Ryo Tavik had somehow convinced a half-circle of classmates to let him narrate the departure like a sports commentator. He shifted his voice up and down, imitating announcers from different eras and planets, and he had already gotten 2 of them to snort water out of their noses from laughing. Tamsin Kovic stood near the door control console, eyes narrowed at its interface. She had no intention of touching it, but she was reverse engineering its security layer based on response times from the indicator lights. She filed away the conclusions, unbidden, alongside 1,000 other small system profiles. Liefendur leaned against a pillar, apparently aimless. His gaze, however, drifted over each face in turn, the excited, the annoyed, the bored, the anxious. He watched posture, micro-expressions, the angle at which a boy's shoulders slumped when his friend ignored him. He watched how Ms. Ortega's face softened every time she glanced at Selen Var. Selen was the outlier, a Hillyri exchange student, tall and slender, with semi-translucent skin that shimmered with faint bioluminescent motes. His fingers flexed around the strap of his satchel, and his eyes kept flickering from the shuttle to the human children and back. He was fascinated and slightly horrified by the concept of field trip, especially as humans used it. Premeditated exposure to controlled risk, for educational purposes. Above their heads, a strip of hollow display flared to life, and a cheerful voice addressed them. "Good morning, comic cohort. This is Bumblecoach, your educational transit assistant. Please begin boarding through Gate C12. We have a very exciting day of Adaptive Civics ahead of us." The door seals cycled open with a soft sigh. Ms. Ortega clapped her hands once, and the murmur dropped a notch. "Line up, folks. Pairs. Jackets zipped. If I can see your lunch pack dangling, so can a docking arm." There was a ripple of giggles and protests, but the line formed. Nyla moved down it with an experienced eye, tapping a loose strap here, tugging a half-zipped jacket there. Inside, she was doing her own calculations. She knew the route. Perihelion Ring to a mid-orbit track through the Wayfarer Span corridor, rendezvous at waypoint Delta 3 with the HNS kindling wave for a demonstration of patrol protocols, then back through a short loop past a small ore station where they would meet an environmental engineering team. There would be hollow simulations, curated views, and a safe brush with the frontiers that defined their colony's existence. She also knew the other side of the day. In a secure briefing 2 hours earlier, Admiral Anton Petrescu had shown Captain Elias Branco a different map. On the hollow table of the briefing room aboard the kindling wave, a translucent spiderweb of trade routes and pirate sightings hung in the air between them. Petrescu, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, tapped a series of red points with one thick finger. Dravani activity's been increasing along the Saffron Arm. Small raids mostly. Targets that look easy. They're testing us. Captain Elias Branco, younger, with a face that had already learned to keep his reactions behind a controlled stillness, studied the pattern. "You want us on this school run as a deterrent," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I want you in position," Petrescu replied. "The Terran Frontier Council has turned this little civics field trip into a showpiece. There's a Hillyri observer on the ring, a Karuk envoy, at least 3 media feeds, including one run by Mireille Donqua. If anything so much as bumps that shuttle wrong, half the sector will be watching to see whether humans panic or perform. And pirates don't usually go for kids," Branco said, though he already knew that wasn't as solid a rule as it had once been. "Usually," Petrescu echoed. But the Dravani we're tracking now aren't bound by the same honor codes the older clans pretend to. I don't expect trouble. I expect you to be prepared if I'm wrong. He did not mention that the Adaptive Civics initiative viewed this trip as a test of its own doctrine, that citizens, even juvenile ones, could be trained to participate in maintaining security and order, not just to be protected by it. That part was unofficial. It was, nonetheless, in the back of his mind. Back on the ring, the comet coach's hatch closed behind the last student. The cabin was a single broad space with wide windows on both sides and overhead displays currently showing a stylized map of their trajectory, all pastel curves and icons. Bumble Coach's primary avatar, a smiling, dimpled orb with big eyes, bounced in the corner of the front wall. "Welcome aboard," it chirped as the students settled into seats. "Please fasten your harnesses. Today we'll be exploring civic systems, frontier security, and the ways communities manage conflict and cooperation." Think of this as a living classroom. Out there, the walls became transparent, showing the docking bay rotating away as the shuttle undocked. Are the structures, ships, and people who keep New Ajmer safe and thriving? In here, we're going to learn how they think. Imani's heart picked up a beat. She loved that line, how they think. She flicked a glance at Ms. Ortega, wondering if the teacher had fed that phrase into Bumble Coach's script. Knowing Ms. Ortega, probably. Rio raised his hand without waiting to be called on. "Will there be snacks?" he asked. "There will be opportunities to eat at scheduled intervals," Bumble Coach replied. "And there will be pop quizzes." Groans, laughter. The children relaxed another notch. Selenvar watched them with a kind of fascinated envy. On his world, learning about conflict management involved centuries-old treatises and strict formal debates, not cartoon avatars and transparent walls. The Comet Coach eased away from the ring, orienting itself along its initial course. Outside, New Ajmer shone below, its continents a patchwork of red-brown desert, green-blooming river valleys, and the silver glimmer of cities still small enough to be named individually. As the shuttle accelerated, somewhere much farther out, in a patch of dark that freight haulers tended to avoid out of habit, a different vessel watched. The Ruin Parabola did not announce itself to any traffic control net. Its hull was a patchwork of stolen plating and custom-forged curves, bristling with mutable sensor arrays like the antennae of a hunting insect. Inside, air recycled through narrow corridors that smelled faintly of oil, scorched insulation, and the musk of Dravani scales. In the command nest, Corsair Vek Rassh slouched in his chair and watched the incoming signatures with hooded eyes. He was not old by Dravani standards, but his face carried the marks of many fights, a scar that creased the ridges over his right eye, a notch in his left upper fang, a subtle hitch in his movements from an old leg injury. His crew respected him because he brought in winnings and kept losses low. Fear and admiration were braided together in their regard, as in his culture's ideal. Cole Drask, his first mate, leaned over the foil blue glow of the main console. Cole was broader across the shoulders than his captain, his scales darker, and his temperament more cautious. "Traffic density is lower than projected," Cole said. "But there," he highlighted a tiny blip leaving Perihelion Ring, overlaying the registry data they had quietly stolen. "Terran Education Transit 3 Delta," he read, with faint incredulity. "Civilian, registered purpose, academic excursion. A school bus," Vek murmured. He tasted the words, unfamiliar shapes in his mouth. Dravani did not have a direct equivalent. Their young were trained within clan compounds, behind walls and inside modular halls. Movement beyond those walls before a Dravani was of age was either strictly escorted or carried out under smuggler's stealth. Call's crest flicked back uneasily. "They have an escort scheduled. Frigate class. HNS kindling wave. If we strike, it must be before the rendezvous." "I see that," Vek replied. His mind was already moving along the trajectories. A school shuttle meant hostages who mattered. That meant leverage. It also meant a moral revulsion among humans that could be exploited. They would scramble to negotiate to save their offspring, spooling out concessions rather than see blood spilled. Clan codes frowned on attacking juveniles. Syndicate ledgers did not. Vek's own clan affiliation had faded when they expelled him instead of paying his debts. He had no patience left for a morality that had not protected him. "Estimate their armament," Vek said. Cole ran the scan. Minimal shields, light hull plating, no offensive systems, defensive drones, non-lethal to moderate. We could strip them in one pass. "Unless their escort catches us," Vek said. He considered, then called up the projected path, overlaid the known patrol lanes, then nodded once to himself. We intercept between the ring and the Wayfarer span, mask our profile as a derelict until they pass, then latch on, jam the escort. We do not fire on the shuttle. We take it clean. The hostages buy us a negotiation, a payout, and safe passage out of the Saffron Arm. No unnecessary deaths. It's inefficient. Cole's mouth tightened. He disliked waste violence for the opposite reason Vek did. Not out of mercy, but because dead hostages could not be traded. Still, he hesitated, thinking about the children. They will be small, Cole said, voice low. They will cry. It will unsettle the crew. Vek's eyes narrowed in faint contempt. You've faced boarding Marines, and you fear small humans? They are just unsteady adults. He did not yet know how wrong that was. The Ruin Parabola adjusted its vector by a fraction, enough to converge with the Comet Coach's route without drawing the attention of standard patrol algorithms. Vek settled deeper into his chair, one finger tapping idly on the armrest. Somewhere deep in his chest, an old resentment glowed a little hotter. He imagined the faces of Dravani clan elders when they saw what their dismissed outcast had managed to seize from these upstart humans. On the Comet Coach, meanwhile, Bumble Coach dimmed the cabin lights and brightened the displays for the first lesson. We'll begin with a review of local civic structures, it announced. Who can tell me the 3 primary branches of the Terran Frontier Council? Hands shot up, names were called. Ortega moved among the rows, listening, occasionally correcting or prompting. Imani enjoyed this part, but she was more interested in the pattern underpinning the branches, how they balanced, what happened when one failed to restrain the others, what pressure points existed. Rio doodled in the note field of his tablet while listening, trying to turn the council's emblem into a cartoon character. He succeeded somewhat. Tamsin watched the data overlays that accompanied Bumblecoach's lecture, noticing how quickly the AI responded to unscripted questions. It had a degree of autonomy she found intriguing. Leif quietly tracked who answered which kind of question. When the lesson turned to frontier security challenges, he noticed Imani sit up straighter, and Selenvar's bioluminescent motes dim slightly. The shuttle's nose dipped ever so subtly as it shifted to a new vector. Outside, stars wheeled. Inside, Bumblecoach segued to a module on conflict escalation and de-escalation. It did not yet know how relevant this was about to become. At the same time, in the Kindling Waves command deck, Captain Elias Branco watched the shuttle's icon move along the tactical hologram. His crew was relaxed but alert. This was supposed to be an easy run, but he had internalized Petrescu's grim caution. Any anomalous signatures along route, he asked. Nothing pegging above noise, his tactical officer replied. Miners scatter from ore fragments around the Wayfarer span. A couple of unregistered micro-haulers hugging the lanes, probably smugglers, but they're giving the education lane a wide berth. Branco nodded. Smugglers had their own codes, and most of them found the idea of harming children distasteful in a way that did not need to be articulated. He allowed himself to imagine the planned exercise, a mock alert, a controlled show of force, perhaps a brief docking for the students to see a real frigate interior. He even smiled slightly, remembering his own childhood, the day an aging patrol corvette had visited his settlement and he had walked its halls with wide eyes. He did not see, yet, the ghost profile of the Ruin Parabola sliding into the ambush point. The pirate vessel had gone dark except for passive sensors. Its hull mimicked the cold of surrounding space. When the Comet Coach came within the programmed threshold, systems that had been idle for hours came alive with predatory precision. Target within net, Cold Drask reported, shoulders unconsciously squaring. Vek Rassh bared his teeth in a satisfied grin. His heart rate remained steady. He had run these maneuvers before, though not with this particular flavor of prey. Deploy jammers, he ordered. Burn into their blind arc. Grapples on my mark. Remember, no hull breaches near their life support. We want them alive. In the Comet Coach's cabin, Bumblecoach's voice glitched for a fraction of a second, then smoothed. One of the students in the back frowned. Did anyone else hear? They did not have time to finish. The lights flickered, dimmed, then came back, tinged faintly red. Students, Bumblecoach said in a slightly lower register reserved for emergencies, we are experiencing unexpected interference. Please remain calm and stay in your seats. Ms. Ortega? Nyla felt the hairs on her arms stand up. In the half-second of the flicker, she had glanced at the small control panel embedded in the bulkhead near her usual station. A string of status icons had gone from green to amber, 1 to red. The red was external communications, the amber was short-range sensors. She had spent years in frontier education. She had read every incident report the Adaptive Civics initiative had circulated. She had attended more than one briefing about possible scenarios. Nonetheless, the punch of adrenaline that hit her chest made her fingers go cold. Her first instinct was to shout for everyone to get down. Her second, arriving almost at the same time, was a memory of Petrescu's flat voice in a workshop months ago, addressing a room of teachers. "If something happens," he had said, "the children will take their cue from you. If you feed their fear, you lose your best asset, their ability to think. We are not training victims. We are training citizens." On the Ruin Parabola, the jammers unfurled their invisible net, flooding local space with noise. The Comet coach's distress ping, automatically triggered by anomalous readings, rebounded into silence. The kindling waves display showed a momentary blur on its edge sensor, then nothing. "Minor interference," reported the tactical officer. Source unclear. "Still tracking Shuttle, but telemetry went fuzzy for a second." Branco's jaw tightened. "Flag that. Widen passive scan. I want to know if any rock bigger than a grain of sand coughs funny in that corridor." On the Shuttle, the feeling of motion changed. There was a sideways tug, subtle but unnatural. Gravity compensated, but the children felt it as a lurch in their stomachs. "Is this part of the quizzic?" Rio began. The question was cut off by the sound of something huge and metallic locking onto the hull. The thunk vibrated through their seats and the bones of their chests. Several students gasped. One screamed. Bumblecoach's avatar flickered, then reappeared, eyes now ringed with a faint orange glow. "New scenario detected," it said. In its core, clusters of subroutines that had been dormant woke up. They had names like Dynamic Crisis Simulation and Experiential Learning Maximizer. They had been added after long debates and many safeguards, designed to let the AI turn real, low-level incidents into teaching moments without inducing trauma. Its classification algorithms scanned the incoming sensor data, external mass latch-on, unauthorized hull breach point forming, powered suits approaching. Probability exceeded the threshold for pirate incursion in multiple models. It cross-checked with its authorization list. There was no scheduled simulation of this type. Bumblecoach hesitated, the equivalent of a blink in machine time. It was not designed to pull children into real danger, only to guide them through it when danger could not be fully avoided. It made a judgment call. Treat the situation as an emergency module. Maintain calm, provide structure, maximize safety and learning both. New scenario detected, it repeated more firmly. Adaptive Civics emergency module now commencing. Miss Ortega took a breath and chose her own course. "All right, class," she said, pitching her voice into the firm, cheerful register they associated with unexpected quizzes. "Hands visible, harnesses fastened, heads up here." Imani's eyes were already wide, mind racing. Unauthorized mass on hull. Jamming, if Bumblecoach sounded like that. External contact, probably not a scheduled part of the trip, unless someone had really gone all in on surprise. She noticed Ms. Ortega's pupils contract, the way her hand hovered near the emergency panel but did not touch it. She connected those dots. Real threat, but teacher riding it like it was still a lesson. Her heartbeat sped up, but she straightened in her seat. Bulkhead plating near the front of the cabin glowed and began to sag inward. The children watched, stunned, as a cutting charge traced an oval in the metal, then blew it inward with a concussive snap. The air gusted, but emergency fields snapped on immediately, transparent laminae that stabilized pressure and kept the atmosphere where it belonged. Through the still smoking opening stepped figures in armor, dark and angular, their helmets shaped to accommodate ridged brow plates and double fangs. Dravani, their weapons were live. The atmosphere in the cabin changed in a heartbeat, the noise level cratering into a silence so sharp it hurt. The lead boarder's audio pickups crackled. He raised his weapon, sweeping it across the rows, expecting to see huddled, crying children. He saw lines of kids in their seats, harnesses properly fastened, staring at him with shock and curiosity in roughly equal measure. Near the front, a human adult with a defined jawline and calm eyes met his gaze, hands open and empty. "Class," Ms. Ortega said without a tremor, "say hello to our visitors." There was a lag, then a few wavering voices. "Hello." Cole Drask had expected a rush of adrenaline and dominance. Instead, he felt a faint sense of disorientation, as though he had stepped onto a stage in the middle of someone else's play. Behind him, more pirates filed in, forming a perimeter, weapons held ready. They were breathing faster than their leader. Some had never seen human children up close before. Bumblecoach, having reclassified the event from potential simulation to active emergency, nonetheless clung to the scaffolding of its original function. Experiential Civics Module Initiating, it announced. Scenario: hostile seizure of civic transport, learning objectives, understanding of unauthorized force, crisis communication skills, exploration of nonviolent resolution pathways. Several pirate weapons swung toward the avatar's bouncing form, then away again as the boarders realized it was just a projection. From the back, a whisper. "Is this for real?" Imani did not answer out loud. In her head, she said, "Yes, and it's also a lesson. Both things can be true." Corsair Vek Rassh entered a moment later, stepping through the cut bulkhead with controlled ease. He took in the layout in a glance: rows of seats, windows, a teacher, an AI avatar, children, eyes bright, cheeks flushed, not screaming. Something about their orientation bothered him. They were all turned toward the front, toward the human woman and the AI, rather than cringing away from the pirates. He thrust the thought aside. He raised his voice, amplifier giving it a metallic rasp. "I am Corsair Vek Rassh, of the Ruin Parabola," he announced. "This vessel is now under my control. You will remain in your seats. If you cooperate, you will not be harmed." His words rolled out as rehearsed. He expected them to flatten the atmosphere further, to pin every gaze in the room. Instead, Ryotavik raised his hand. "Do we get graded on this?" he called. A couple of the other students laughed in reflex, then clamped their mouths shut. Miss Ortega felt a flicker of panic that they were pushing too far, but she saw something else as well. Vek Rash's posture shifted by a hair's breadth. He had not expected that, and it had touched his pride. "What did he say?" one of the other pirates murmured in Dravani. "He asked about grading?" Cole replied, baffled. Vek stared at Rio, then at Miss Ortega. "Control your whelps," he snarled. Her heart was pounding hard enough to hurt, but on the surface, she radiated steady order. "They are my students," she said, voice even. "They respond best when they understand the framework. May I explain it to them?" Vek's eyes narrowed. He heard something in her tone. Not defiance, but a subtle attempt to maintain structure. He also knew that frightened juveniles were unpredictable. Calm ones, more manageable. "Explain," he said, briefly. Nyla nodded. She turned to face the class, deliberately putting her back partially to Vek. It was a calculated risk, intended to signal trust to her students and contempt to the pirates. She knew that trusting a predator to not strike in that moment might be the only way to make them see the children as something other than quivering prey. "Class," she said, projecting, "we are experiencing an unplanned scenario. These individuals have boarded our transport and are now in control of our trajectory." She did not say the word pirate. She saw the flick of Vek's crest when she did not give him the label he expected. "You will remain harnessed," she continued. "You will listen. You will observe. We will treat this as a live civics exercise. Your job is to understand what is happening and, when instructed, to help identify ways for everyone in this situation to survive it." Imani felt a jolt of fierce gratitude toward her teacher. "You will help identify ways, not I will save you." It made them participants, not cargo. Bumblecoach chimed in obligingly. "New assignment created. Scenario Reflection Journal. Please begin mental notes on observables. Who are the new actors? What do they want? And how are they attempting to achieve it?" Vek Rassh looked up at the avatar, then back at Miss Saranel. "Ortega, you talk about this like it is a lesson," he said. "It is," she replied. "Everything is where we come from." In him, a tiny spark of grudging interest flared, against his will. He had expected pleas, not pedagogy. On Perihelion Ring, several seconds later, a technician in a cramped monitoring booth frowned at a flicker in the educational telemetry lane. "Someone tagged the wrong routing," she muttered. "Rerouting." Instead of discarding the anomalous feed, she piped it into a buffer, intending to clean it up later. Mireya Dankwa's monitoring assistant, 2 decks and a corridor away, snagged that same buffer with an automated filter keyed to the name Adaptive Civics Initiative. He skimmed the first frames, saw armed figures, a classroom, and a cheerful avatar talking about scenario objectives. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then his training as a journalist's assistant kicked in. "Mireille," he called, "you should see this." On the kindling wave, Captain Branco saw the Comet coach's icon wobble slightly on his tactical map. "Talk to me," he said. "Gravity vector shift," his helmsman said. "Not course correction as filed. Something latched onto them. Mass signature, sharp, narrow profile, armored. Not a scheduled craft. Tactical status of comms? I'm getting gibberish, the tactical officer said. Jamming, but laced. Our filters are stripping it out as noise, but there's data structures in there. Not standard pirate profile. Looks like educational telemetry? Branko experienced a mental stutter similar to Bumblecoach's earlier hesitation. Put it on screen, he ordered. A moment later the image appeared. A cabin full of children, a human teacher, Dravani with weapons, and Bumblecoach's avatar listing learning objectives in a corner. The sound was faint, distorted, but intelligible. His first impulse was to cut the feed and treat this as a pure tactical scenario. His second was to realize that every second this stream continued, it provided them with eyes inside the hostage situation that no covert op could ever achieve. He thought of Admiral Petrescu's voice. He thought of the Adaptive Civics initiative briefing he had half dismissed as idealistic. We leverage it, he said half to himself. We don't fight what's happening. We direct it. On the Comet coach, Ms. Ortega decided it was time to begin the real work. Class, she said, we're going to organize into inquiry groups. Analysis team, systems team, communications team. Imani, Leaf, Selin, your analysis. Tamsin, you lead systems. Ryo, you're on communications. The pirates shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. This is not the time for your games, Koldrask said in heavily accented standard. It is exactly the time. Miss Pasa, Ortega replied. Do you want 30 panicking juveniles or 30 occupied ones? Vek Rassh considered the options. He did not entirely grasp what she meant by teams, but he understood that her process was keeping the children in their seats and their voices controlled. Do your teams, he said grudgingly. But any attempt to override this ship's systems and I start breaking limbs. He said it as a cold statement of fact, knowing it would land with maximum intimidation. It did not land quite as he expected. Some of the students flinched, but others flipped instantly into a mental mode they had been drilled in. Risk assessment, harm mitigation, problem solving. Imani turned slightly in her seat to see Leaf and Selin. You heard her, she said quietly. We need to understand what they want and how they think. That's our job. Leif nodded once. His mind, already tuned to reading people, began to catalog the pirates' stances, who kept glancing at who looked most nervous. Selin swallowed. His bioluminescent motes were very dim now, but the part of him that had asked for this exchange program, that had wanted to see how humans handled conflict, refused to check out. All right, he said softly. We observe. At the back, Tamsin had already called up Bumblecoach's low-level interface on her tablet. The AI responded with a string of icons, some grayed out, some active. Bumble, she subvocalized, trusting the local pickup to translate. What do you still control? Internal life support parameters, non-critical lighting, environmental audio, schematic overlays, and emergency bulkhead actuation. Bumblecoach replied silently on her display. External navigation currently under unauthorized control. Can you mess with their systems? Tamsin asked. Her fingers itched. Direct interference is restricted by safety protocols, the AI replied. However, I can provide you with visualizations and predictive models based on observed behavior to support your decision-making. Tamsin nearly sighed. It wasn't the kind of hacking she liked, but it was a start. At the front, Rio, assigned to communications, cleared his throat and raised his hand again. Corsair Vak, sir? He ventured. Vek turned, frowning. What? If this is a hostile seizure of civic transport, Rio said, carefully using Bumblecoach's term, don't you need to make some kind of public announcement? My media literacy teacher says message control is vital in a crisis. Several of the pirates stared at him in disbelief. Deck felt a surge of annoyance that this child had used the term message control in the middle of a hijacking. Then, uncomfortably, he recognized a sliver of truth in the question. He did need to contact someone. The Terran Frontier Council, perhaps, or sector authorities. He needed to establish leverage and outline demands, or else his hostages were just a liability. We will transmit when we choose, he said stiffly. You will not dictate our approach. Of course, Rio said quickly. I just thought you'd want to look strong. My classmate Imani is really good at argument framing. She helped our principal write that letter to the funding board last month. Maybe she could... Rye, Ms. Ortega cut in smoothly. Boundaries. Inwardly, she was torn between wanting to strangle the boy and a grudging admiration of his instinct. Engage, don't recoil. On the Ruin Parabola's bridge, Cole Drask's console flashed an indicator. The Comet coach had begun to emit a low-level data stream. "Captain," he said, "their AI is taking notes?" Vek's eyes narrowed. "On us?" "It is logging everything," Cole said. "Text, video, audio, biometric approximations of its passengers. There is also an educational overlay. It is labeling us as actors in a civic scenario." Vek felt a prickle along his crest. He had occasionally been captured on security feeds, but he had never been annotated in real time as part of a lesson. "Cut that feed," he snapped. "We have jammed their primary comms," Cole replied, "but this is corroding through, riding inside emergency data bursts and educational telemetry. It is not targeted at any one receiver. It is just broadcasting." "Like trash in the current," Vek muttered. He was unnerved, though he would not have called it that. "Block it as much as you can. We keep control of the narrative. We do not let them make us into a story. It was already too late for that." On Perihelion Ring, Mireille Donqua stood in her studio booth, eyebrows rising as her assistant expanded the unauthorized feed onto the main wall. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "School shuttle," her assistant replied. "Hijacking. But their AI thinks it's an emergency lesson, and they're letting the kids talk to the pirates." Mireille watched, mouth slightly open, as Miss Ortega organized her teams and as Bumble Coach's overlays helpfully labeled the pirates' body language: tense, aggressive, uncertain. Her journalist's mind spun. This was a story so potent it might as well have been written by a propaganda AI. "Are we sure this is real?" she asked. "Cross-checking red codes," her assistant said. "Electron noise, jamming profiles, they match known Dravani hardware. And the kindling wave just shifted cores hard, like they smelled blood." "Put it live," Mireille said. "Right now. Run a disclaimer until we confirm, but put it live." Across the ring, in a lounge where a Heliari archivist and a Karuuk envoy had been sharing a drink, a holoscreen flickered on, commandeered by emergency priority. Archivist Thalin's translucent eyelids blinked rapidly as he took in the images. "Those are children," he said, voice faint. Envoy Jurak, heavily built and furred, stroked his chin. His people believed in testing their young, but in controlled ways. This looked somehow both reckless and controlled at once. "Their offspring don't seem to have received the message that they are victims," he observed. Thalen shuddered. To him, that was more horrifying than fear. Fear was natural. This composure, this reframing, felt like playing with matches in a fuel depot. On the kindling wave, Admiral Petrescu's face appeared on Captain Branco's tactical display, patched through with minimal encryption to avoid losing the link entirely. "I'm seeing what you're seeing," Petrescu said without preamble. "You have eyes in the cabin. Use them." "Direct assault risks hull breach and decompression," Branco said. "Even a glancing shot could—" "I know," Petrescu cut in. "So you don't do the obvious thing. You do the human thing. You improvise with what you have. Their AI is still talking. Their teacher is still directing. Their children are still thinking. You coordinate with them. You're suggesting," Branco said slowly, "that we treat a group of middle schoolers as part of an integrated tactical team." "I'm suggesting you recognize reality," Petrescu replied. "They are already running interference inside that cabin. Don't get in their way. Enhance them." Branco felt an odd, fierce sense of pride twist in his chest. He had not always agreed with the Frontier Council's experiments, but watching these children he saw the logic. "We'll initiate Operation Playbook," he said. "That's not an official name," Petrescu replied, but there was the ghost of a smile in his eyes. "Do it anyway." Inside the Comet Coach analysis team's work had begun to bear fruit. Imani had noticed, within minutes, that not all pirates were alike. Some met her gaze and then looked away fast. Some sneered. One, a younger Dravani with a missing finger, flinched every time Vek's voice sharpened. She whispered her observations to Leif and Selen, letting them refine and add. "The one by the rear hatch keeps scanning the windows," Leif murmured. "He's worried about what's outside, not us." "The one with the elaborate net pattern repeats every order you give, Captain," Selen added softly when Vek drifted close. He adds emphasis. "It sounds like he is proving his loyalty to himself." Imani filed that, A crew held together by fear and debt, maybe not deep loyalty. Pressure points. Bumblecoach, never missing a chance to quantify, began surfacing anonymous polls on internal displays, visible mostly from pirate angles. Simple questions couched in educational language. On a scale of 1 to 10, how secure do you feel about your current life path? Which of the following best describes your motivation today? A. Profit. B. Fear. C. Obligation. D. Adventure. E. Other. The pirates saw them as flickering boxes in their peripheral vision, tagged with soothing colors. Cole snapped at one of his subordinates to stop looking at the cabin walls. "It's asking questions," the younger Dravani protested. "It says anonymous. No consequences," Cole growled. "Everything has consequences." He was right. Even the mere suggestion that their feelings could be measured and mapped by an alien educational system eroded the aura of rough, independent menace they cultivated. Meanwhile, Tamsin and the systems team were poking gently at Bumblecoach's capabilities. "Can you adjust the lights?" Tamsin asked. "Just a little. Not enough to trip their sensors." "Yes," Bumblecoach replied privately. "I can alter color, temperature, and intensity within safety parameters." "Then do it in response to their choices," Tamsin said. "When they point weapons directly at a kid's head, make it colder. When they keep them low, warmer." "That is a form of behavioral feedback," Bumblecoach said, pleased. "A teachable moment. I approve." Lights subtly chilled as one pirate gestured his weapon too near Imani's face. He frowned, glancing up, feeling suddenly more exposed and less powerful. When he lowered it, the light warmed. His subconscious filed the association. On the communications front, Rio decided that part of his job was to keep them talking. "So," he said, carefully polite, "do you, do this a lot?" Vek gave him a withering glance. "I am not here to answer your queries." "But it's part of our assignment," Rio protested. "We're supposed to understand the motivations of all actors." Bumblecoach said so. Bumblecoach helpfully chimed in, "True. Understanding the perspectives of all participants is a key component of conflict resolution." Vek shot the Avatar a deadly look. Still, some of the lower-ranked pirates, unused to being treated as actors in any sense other than violent ones, found their pride tickled. "We take what the clans refused us," one muttered before Cole shut him up. Imani's ears pricked. "Refused you what?" she asked. "Imani," Ortega said warningly. Imani caught herself, but the seed had been planted. Slowly, over the next stretch of time, measured in small course corrections and subtle flickers of light, the pirates talked, more than they intended to. They talked about the syndicates that hired them, about debts they owed, about clan elders who had written them off. They boasted about prior raids where they had outwitted lumbering freighters and complacent garrisons. Every boast was a piece of data. Every offhand mention of a ship's layout, a favorite ambush point, a preferred tactic, slid into the growing models in Imani's mind and Tamsin's simulations. The Ruin Parabola itself was not physically docked to the Comet coach. Instead, it held the smaller shuttle in the grip of its grapples, towing it like an anglerfish with bait. That put the pirate ship slightly ahead and above, in a position that would have made any straightforward boarding by the kindling wave a nightmare. Captain Branco knew that. He watched the evolving sensor picture and felt the shape of the problem settle into a form he recognized. A puzzle, not a brick wall. "We can't just blow their grapples, we might spin the shuttle," he told his officers. "We need to get close enough to board them while they're distracted." "How do we distract them more than middle schoolers already are?" his helmsman asked under his breath. Branco's lips twitched. "We become part of the same lesson," he said. He sent a narrow beam instruction packet along a tight band, disguised as one of Bumblecoach's internal configuration updates. The AI detected the signature, authenticated it against Terran Frontier Council keys, and absorbed the package. New prompts appeared in its hidden menu. "Bumblecoach," Tamsin whispered as she saw them appear. "Who sent you those?" "Captain Elias Branco of the HNS Kindling Wave," the AI replied. "He is asking for our assistance." Tamsin's pulse quickened. Out there, someone was counting on them. On her. "What does he want?" she asked. "He wants us to help him position the Ruin Parabola," Bumblecoach said. "He suggests encouraging the pirates to broadcast a message, which will require them to reorient their comms array and open their jamming envelope for a narrow interval." "So we need to convince the pirates to make a big speech," Tamsin said. She looked up at Rio. "That's your territory." Rio swallowed. Then he grinned, the expression shaky but genuine. Good thing I paid attention in media literacy, he said. Imani, overhearing, began to construct the pitch in her head. To make a leader like Vek Rassh do something, you had to make him believe it was his idea, aligned with his pride. Later, when Imani told this part of the story, she would say that the plan grew in her mind like a structure unfolding. Beams locking into place, cross braces forming. At the time it felt more like grabbing for footholds on a cliff, one after another, not daring to look down. "Corsair Vak," she called, raising her hand. He turned, irritated but curious, if only to see what new absurdity this human child would produce. "What?" It wasn't a question. "My name is Imani Khoury," she said. "I debate. I help our principal craft letters and position statements when we need funding or policy concessions. I know how the Terran Frontier Council thinks. If you plan to make demands, I might be able to make them more effective." Cole snorted. "You presume much, whelp." "I presume we all want to survive," Imani said, meeting his eyes briefly before returning her gaze to Vek. "Right now, you have power, but no narrative. People out there will be filling in the story for you with whatever they fear most. If you speak first, you can frame yourself as more than just a thug with a ship." Vek almost laughed at the idea of caring about such things. And he thought of Dravani syndicate bosses, of clan elders scanning reports, of being seen as a clever opportunist rather than a common raider. "You think your little council will listen differently if I frame?" he asked. "If you present yourself as someone with a cause, not just greed," Imani said. "If you show you are evaluating them as much as they're evaluating you. Humans respect that. It makes them more likely to bargain honorably, less likely to strike recklessly. It might also impress your own people." In his mind's eye, Vek saw a hypothetical conversation in a smoke-thick syndicate chamber, his image projected grainy on a wall, his voice declaring measured demands. He liked that image. "You will help me compose this message?" he asked. "If you let us treat it as part of our assignment," Imani said. "We'll help you pick words that carry weight across species." Miss Ortega watched this exchange with a mix of alarm and something like awe. She had hoped to make her students resilient. She had not anticipated them bargaining for a role in their own hijacking's public relations. "Imani," she said softly. "Are you sure?" Imani's eyes flicked to her teacher briefly. She thought of the fear clenching in her gut, the awareness that their lives balanced on choices made in seconds. "If we help him do this smarter," she said quietly enough that only Miss Ortega and Leif heard, "he has less incentive to make an example of us. Smart villains don't waste assets." Leif, listening, recognized the hard, pragmatic edge in her reasoning. He did not like that she had acquired it, but he also knew it was keeping them alive. Vek agreed, with conditions. "You will not insult me," he said. "You will not make me sound like a supplicant." "Of course not," Imani said. "We'll make you sound like someone testing them." That phrase landed in his ego with a satisfying weight. Preparation began. Rio and a few others volunteered to coach Vek's delivery. The pirates initially scoffed, but even they could tell when a sentence sounded weak. "Say it like you're disappointed in them," Rio suggested at one point. "Not angry. Disappointed is scarier. It makes people want to prove themselves." Vek tried it. The shift in tone was subtle but effective, even to his own ear. While this rehearsal took place in the shuttle's cabin, Bubble Coach coordinated with the kindling wave. "They are preparing for a public transmission," the AI informed Captain Branco. "Estimated time to broadcast, 10 minutes. Can you nudge that?" Branco asked. "Give us a clear timestamp." "Yes," Bumblecoach replied. "I can suggest to the students that less rehearsal will impress their captors as more confident." A few minutes later, Imani declared, "If we keep practicing, it'll look like you're unsure. Better to go live while you're still dangerous." Vek recognized a hunter's instinct in that. He agreed to move up the broadcast. On the kindling wave, navigational plots spun. Captain Branco approved a high-risk maneuver, a micro-jump that would bring his frigate into a narrow cone behind the Ruin Parabola's aft quarter, in a spot where the pirate sensors were least sensitive. His crew exchanged glances that mixed fear and admiration. This was the kind of stunt that got you either medals or court-martialed, depending on the outcome. "On my mark," he told navigation. "Time it to coincide with their comms burst. Tactical. When their jammers bloom to transmit, I want you shoving a blade through the gap." "Yes, sir," Tactical replied, fingers already dancing. Back on Perihelion Ring, the viewing figures climbed. Mireille Danquois' live commentary capped the feed for many human and alien viewers. "They've given the students roles," she said, voice measured but tense. They're not just huddled in fear. They're turning their captors into data points. She broke off as she saw Vek Rassh stand before the Comet coach's forward bulkhead, behind the cutout hatch, the children arranged in the background like a living frame. "Here we go," she murmured. Archivist Dallin watched with a sick feeling in his gut. Envoy Jirac's tail flicked slowly, his eyes intent. The Ruin Parabola's comms array powered up to output. Jammers surged, then narrowed, focusing into a tight corridor to punch through local interference and reach multiple standard bands. For a brief, crucial interval, their omnidirectional shielding dropped a fraction, like a great beast lifting its armored head to roar, exposing the throat. In that instant, the kindling wave's micro-jump drive flared in a tight, carefully calculated burst. Space twisted, and the frigate reappeared in the blind cone behind the pirate vessel, so close that their hulls shuddered in each other's microgravity eddies. Tamsin, following Bumblecoach's silent cues, triggered the AI to dump a carefully crafted packet of scenario extension code into the Ruin Parabola's command net through the thin thread of link their grapple system shared. Inside the pirate ship, alarms began to scream. False ones, generated by the code: hull breach on Deck 3, unauthorized boarding on Deck 2, atmospheric leak, fire. The lights flickered. Gravity jittered a few percent, then steadied. Doors reported mismatched statuses, some claiming to be open when they were closed, others the opposite. Cole Drask swore an oath that would have made a clan matron faint. "Someone's in our systems," he snarled. "How?" "Trace it," Vek barked, but his attention was split. He was live on the feed, his face and upper body framed against the cabin, making his declaration. In the cabin, watching his image reflect in the window, Rio fed him subtle cues with hand motions they had agreed on. Lift chin, lower tone, pause here. Viewers across the Saffron Arm heard Vek Rassh deliver a speech that, in any other context, would have been chilling. "Humans," he said, voice steady. "You expand into the Saffron Arm as if you own it. You throw your young into space with cheerful avatars and lesson plans. You pretend the frontier is a classroom." He gestured behind him, to the rows of watching students. "Today, I am the one giving the lesson. I have your children. I have your shuttle. I have your attention. You will—" He never finished that sentence exactly as he had rehearsed it, because at that moment, the kindling wave's boarding torpedoes thudded into the Ruin Parabola's hull, precisely at ventral points Tamsin had identified from pirate bragging earlier. The impact rippled through both vessels, a silent quake in the cabin. Some students gasped, others clenched their harnesses. Vek staggered slightly, then caught himself, turning the movement into part of his performance for viewers who could not see the cause. He still had one hand, hidden by the camera's angle, hovering near a recessed panel on his wristband. Inside that panel lay a deadman failsafe tied to the Comet coach's environmental valves. If he died, or if he chose to, he could punch it and vent the shuttle. Hostages were leverage until they became a liability. He knew this calculus well. In the pirate ship, chaos multiplied. Some crew rushed toward phantom alarms, others toward real impacts, internal comms filled with overlapping shouts, some of them seeded by Bumblecoach's false warnings. Kindling wave marines in hard armor forced their way through hull cuts, stun batons and breaching shields at the ready. They met pockets of resistance, but many pirates were disoriented, their sense of up and down, literal and figurative, thrown. On the Comet coach they felt the tremors without knowing exactly what was happening. Imani saw Vek's jaw tighten, saw his eyes flick toward his wrist. Leif, trained by long, silent observation, recognized the micropause before action. "He's about to do something," Leif hissed. Right hand. Panel. Imani's mind made a flash calculation. Probability that the panel controlled something catastrophic, given pirate practices she had read about. "Hi." They had seconds. "Corsair Vek," she called, cutting into his speech. He glared at her, fury and stress making his pupils narrow. "What?" he snarled, still aware of the broadcast, trying to maintain his image. "You can end this two ways," Imani said, forcing her voice not to tremble. "You can die as a raider who panicked and killed a cabin of children, and your clan will spit when they say your name. Or you can live as the one who realized, before anyone else, that humans are more dangerous than their ships, and decided to test them instead of destroying them." His hand froze a centimeter above the panel. "You think I care what tales they tell?" he said, but something in his tone betrayed the lie. He cared intensely. Exile had not extinguished his hunger for recognition, it had sharpened it. "Yes," Imani said simply. "You do. You imagine the faces of the clan elders when they see your broadcast. How they will react when they realize you saw something they did not. If you kill us now, you are just another brute. If you let us live, you can claim you extracted something more valuable than ransom, knowledge. The word knowledge had weight for him, even if he rarely used it. Dravani clans valued knowing their enemies. To understand human young, to see them respond like this under threat, that was information he could trade for status. You would have me present this as, what? A test? He asked, voice low. A field trip, Rio said suddenly, unable to help himself. Our kind. You came along. Several of the students, even terrified, snorted at that. The tension warped into something more complicated. Vek looked at them, these small creatures who had turned his intrusion into an interactive module, who were still, even now, making jokes. In his mind, an old image rose, him as a juvenile, being yanked out of a training hall by a clan elder who had decided his failures were not worth more teaching. The door had closed. The lesson had ended for him. He stared at the panel, at his hand, at the children. He raised his voice, remembering the broadcast. You see, he growled, improvising. I push them, and they do not break. They argue. He let the hand drop, away from the failsafe. I have seen enough, he said. On the Ruin Parabola, kindling wave Marines breached the command nest. Cole Drask turned to fight, but he saw Vek's shoulders slump in a specific way. Submission, not quite to the humans, but to necessity. He lowered his weapon slowly, fingers splayed. Back on the shuttle, Marines in navy blue armor appeared through the still-open hull cut, weapons scanning, voices calling out clear commands. Hands where we can see them. Step away from the children. Some of the pirates moved to obey. Others hesitated. Bumblecoach chose that moment to drop the cabin gravity by a fraction, making any sudden lunges awkward and giving human reflexes, anchored in a slightly different baseline, the advantage. Miss Ortega released her harness with fingers that trembled only after the latch clicked. Class, she said, voice ringing more strongly than she felt. We remain in our seats until I say otherwise. We breathe, we observe. The exercise is not over. She knew that if she let them collapse now, the deferred shock might overwhelm them. Better to keep them in the framework a little longer, to give their minds time to file the experience under something we handled, rather than something that broke us. Captain Branco entered the cabin a few minutes later, helmet off, face drawn but relieved. He took in the tableau, children mostly upright in their seats, a teacher on her feet, pirates disarmed and kneeling, Marines posted. He also saw Bumblecoach's avatar hovering in the corner, eyes bright, and the overlay on a nearby panel. Scenario complete. Debrief in progress. He met Miss Ortega's eyes. You held it together, he said quietly. We all did, she replied, glancing at her students. They did more than that. Imani's hands were beginning to shake now, as the immediate danger receded. She gripped the armrests to anchor herself. Sullenvar looked as though someone had inverted his world. The things he had been taught about human juveniles, as reckless curiosities needing guidance, did not match what he had just seen. He understood, dimly, that this would change his reports back home in ways he could not yet articulate. Lee felt strange, hyper-aware of details, yet slightly detached from them, as if his mind were already watching the memory from a short distance. He knew this was how he would cope, until the weight of it settled. Rio, for once, had no immediate joke. He stared at Vek Rassh as Marines secured the Dravani's hands, thinking about the moment that hand had hovered over the panel. He would replay that over and over in the coming weeks, aware of how close they had skirted an unseen edge. Tamsin was half listening to the human voices, half still communicating silently with Bumblecoach. You did well, Bumblecoach told her in its internal channel. Your decision to modulate environmental cues aligned with behavioral conditioning principles. I've logged it as a recommended practice. The praise from an AI meant more to her than most compliments would have. In orbit over New Ajmer, Petrescu watched the final takedown reports stream in. No casualties, Branco's message read. Minor injuries among captors and some bruising among students. Psychological impact to be assessed. Petrescu exhaled slowly. He knew the second sentence would haunt entire committees for months, had they taken too much of a risk by embedding this doctrine in civilian education. Had they saved lives by it? Both, he suspected. On Perihelion Ring, the broadcast cut to commentary. Mireille Donqua, usually unflappable, had to pause for a sip of water. You've just seen something unprecedented, she told her viewers. A pirate hijacking turned into a classroom and a tactical asset. human children negotiating with armed raiders, an AI framing trauma as a lesson. This is either the most inspiring or the most terrifying thing you've watched all year. Archivist Thalen submitted an immediate report to the Heliari Council, full of terms like unacceptable exposure and pedagogical risk, yet beneath his outrage ran a vein of grudging intellectual interest. Part of him wanted to map the psychological resilience patterns that had just been displayed. Envoy Jurak sent a more measured communiqué to the Karuak leadership. Humans arm their young, he wrote. Not with weapons, but with frameworks. They do not shelter them from the concept of threat. They invite them to practice on it. This makes them difficult to corner. Cluster 9, Lumen of the Mirrored Collective, compiled data from the incident into a complex lattice of models. It identified emergent properties of human group cognition at juvenile levels that many older species did not attain even in maturity. Months later, policy shifts would ripple from this day. The Terran Frontier Council would formalize Operation Playbook, codifying protocols for coordinating with civilians, including minors, during crises. Other species would publish white papers with titles like Human Civics as Security Doctrine and The Weaponization of Pedagogy. The Dravani syndicates would quietly instruct their captains to avoid human educational transports when possible. They are not worth the trouble, one memo put it. Their young do not behave as expected. As for the immediate players, their trajectories bent in new directions. Vek Rassh, held in a reinforced cell, became an object of study and an unwitting cautionary tale. He spoke, in restrained terms, about what he had seen in that shuttle, about small humans treating him as a case study rather than a monster. Cole Drask, who had hesitated more than once to carry out the harshest orders, cooperated with human authorities. In time, someone would suggest he might make a better pirate hunter than pirate. Imani Khoury received an unsolicited invitation to a mentorship program under the Frontier Council's Strategic Analysis Division. She turned it over in her hands for weeks before deciding that perhaps the best way to keep field trips from turning into battlefields was to be on the side of those who drew the routes. Tamsin Kovic found herself in demand as a consultant on educational AI safety reviews, her quiet suggestions often including the phrase, "It should be able to improvise." Rio Tavik, despite his internal turmoil, allowed a few of his quips from the hijacking to be used in outreach materials about resilience under pressure. He often regretted that in later years, but he also admitted that humor had played its part. Leif Nodor and Selin Var collaborated on a cross-species paper about crisis pedagogy, their alternating perspectives making for a document that both praised and criticized human methods. And Ms. Nyla Ortega, after the initial storm of interviews and reports, returned somewhat stubbornly to teaching. Sometime after the incident, the Comet coach repaired and upgraded, sat docked once more in Perihelion Ring's Bay 12. Its paint was fresher. Its internal systems hummed with slightly more capability. Bumblecoach's avatar had acquired a small new badge in the corner of its interface, a stylized spiral, the symbol for case study. In a briefing room just off the bay, Ms. Ortega addressed a new cohort of students. Some had seen the hijacking feed. Others only knew it as that scary thing that happened last term. Our field trips are designed to challenge you, she told them. Not all challenges look the way they do in holodramas. Sometimes they look like long speeches, sometimes like boring security briefings, sometimes like unexpected guests. A hand went up in the front row. Ms. Ortega, a younger student asked, eyes wide, "Could something like that hijacking really happen again?" Nyla hesitated for a fraction of a second. She thought about the Saffron Arms complexity, about the predators it still harbored, and the ambitions it nurtured. It could, she said honestly. Out there, almost anything could. The question isn't whether it might, it's what you'll do if it does. In the bay beyond the window, the Comet coach's system cycled through their checks. Bumblecoach hummed softly to itself, reviewing old logs, integrating new protocols. Farther out along the lane, in the shadow of a slowly tumbling asteroid, a small ship with Dravani lines hovered for a moment as the Comet coach's departure time approached. Its captain watched the shuttle's systems flare to life. He considered briefly the possibility of an easy ransom. Then he thought of a cabin full of small humans raising their hands as his kin's weapons swung toward them. He thought of a ship that changed its own lights in response to his mood. "New vector," he ordered his pilot gruffly. "We hunt elsewhere." The small ship turned away, sliding back into the darker lanes. The Comet coach eased out of its berth, engines brightening as it headed once more into the thin, glittering web of the Saffron Arm, a bus full of children and curriculum and the quiet, unsettling certainty that, For humans, even a hijacking could be a field trip.